Have you ever wanted to tame the wilds, exploring new horizons on the back of your trusty space amoeba? Well, after the utter maelstrom of negative reviews that Cosmic Storms received, Stellaris is now back in the ring a month later with a new DLC, the Grand Archive. As an aspiring Tianki trainer who wants to be the very best there ever was and collect all 151 artifacts introduced with the new update, I was absolutely delighted at the thought of packing this video with as many nauseating puns as possible. There is a ton of content to cover, with 17 new relics, 2 new space fauna, a new endgame crisis, origins, and much more, so let's get started. This channel always brings up prior content to set the scene for reviews and breakdowns, because I think it's important to give viewers the full context on the current state of the game. While I consider Stellaris to be one of Paradox's most consistent titles in terms of quality, Cosmic Storms was probably its most poorly received expansion in a long time. In contrast to Cosmic Storms, I've really enjoyed my playthroughs of the Grand Archive so far. For the sake of brevity, I'll shorten it to GA, but one of my biggest concerns was that GA would fall too much into being a parody of itself. For example, Cosmic Storms often leaned heavily on the new storm mechanic. That's fine, but what I mean when I say this is that there's not a lot of content beyond that. During my first playthrough with the Storm Chaser's origin, all of the flavor text focused on chasing gnarly storms like some washed out 50-year-old surfer bro. For how much damage the storms dealt to my planets in the form of devastation, they never had any long-lasting impacts on the society of my empire. There were a few cool moments when I received resource bonuses, but there were no political upsets, sweeping cultural changes, or events where I could choose a new path forward to manage the ridiculous number of storms I was getting. When I'm playing through GA, I don't usually have these problems because the content is bifurcated. The Grand Archive section, which is all about collecting and putting new discoveries on display, exists in its own area separate from the other half of this DLC. It's unburdened by what has been. Spaceborne organisms are this other half, and though there are some intersections with your collection, the new mid-game crisis and taming don't usually cross over that frequently. These systems are better tied together conceptually. You go around collecting specimens, Tianki, and whatever else you want to put into your British Museum, and get stronger and stronger as time progresses. I think it's fair to bring up balance, since I feel like I'm already trending towards this topic, and it's really hard to get a good grasp on where most of the specimens land. So far, the game has done a decent job at using a rarity system to keep some of the better items behind lengthier side quests. But a few of the exceptional specimens have given me some powerful research bonuses, which I definitely noticed later down the line. My empire had a few problems with the spaceborne organisms, and I'm still unsure whether this is up to bad luck, but if I wanted to have a bioship playthrough early on, I had to play with one of the new civics or origins. To get your bestiary started in the first place, you need to roll gravity snares as a research option and then have organisms floating around your borders. In other words, my playthroughs without those special civics that gave me a head start on gravity snares or guaranteed organic lifeforms near my capital started off far slower because I didn't have the technology. I understand that there is a trade-off with certain civics, but there really should be some other options for players if they want to invest in bioships. I had a ton of fun with the unique breeding mechanics on starts where I managed to amass a sizable fleet. Some of the bioships are noticeably weaker than their metallic counterparts, so I'm sure we will be seeing some crazy guides on how to min-max them to hell and back. Regardless, the bulk of my time spent capturing Pokemon involves strategically placing lures on space stations and waiting them out via a science ship. To capture space fauna, you need to have gravity snares researched, have a science ship nearby, and left-click on the fauna to send out a beast ball, snare. There is a random success chance, so you might fail a few times before getting your first whale or amoeba, but let me tell you something. I have never been so hypnotized by an animation before. I don't know if there's something wrong with me after several years of creating content on YouTube, but I love watching the capture animation play out and I'm still not tired of it. On a related note, the tanks that you build to house creatures in your vivarium are also great. You can increase tank space by building more modules, but the whole collecting and breeding process is surprisingly involved, and I found myself chasing after rarer and rarer specimens to make stronger fighters. This also uses the same rarity system I mentioned earlier, which is a nice tie-in. Of course, the Grand Archive is an important component of housing these organisms, but it comes super early and it is barely an inconvenience to build. What I'm more disappointed by is the lack of accessibility. In the past, we've had origins and civics that allow you to directly play with a mechanic without waiting, but I found that after getting the technology researched, building an archive, setting up space stations with hatcheries, and doing special projects, it adds a huge amount of waiting to the game. At times, I felt like I was intentionally kneecapping myself because I was going out of the way to get inherently weaker ships. Thankfully, I didn't have the same experience with the Grand Archive proper, and I found it to be a much smoother experience altogether. Since you need the Grand Archive to be built to activate the specimens, much akin to relics, the power creep was much more gradual in my playthroughs. There was also a super fun interaction I've seen with AI empires where you can actually destroy their archives to get specimens if you are going on a collection spree. In a lot of ways, this part of the paid content reminded me of Ancient Relics, because it goes back and adds specimens to older events and origins. For example, I recently had a planet-wide event involving a hypnotic space flower that was added 5+ years ago to the game. Despite this, I received a unique specimen that was worth sitting through the event and carefully reading through the text boxes before making decisions. This isn't the case with every single event. Some of the specimens are more underwhelming than others, but I was finally being encouraged to revisit older adventures that I had already been on. I would love to see this much detail being put into revamping some of the older origins, and that is a topic I want to talk about next. I've already expressed my disdain for some origins that speedrun you through interacting with new content, because I think they take up valuable real estate for what would be more interesting features. I've had a lot of fun with the more story-driven origins like Payback, On the Shoulders of Giants, and Knights of the Toxic God, but I know that not everyone plays Stellaris for the story. However, when you drop someone into new content without any other substantial changes, it feels very underwhelming to me as the game drags on. Sure, having the Shroud origin at 2200 and being able to directly interact with the weird space witches is cool, but after I've played the Psionic Ascension path several times, it loses its luster. With some of the more niched mechanics, these origins are going to be near mandatory, but to me it always feels like the space is always competitive. It's fine if some origins are less convoluted, but a few of these are really beginning to show their age. Do you want to jump straight into beast taming? Great, but aside from a few different buffs and head starts on research options, you're not going to have unique organisms to play around with or anything. I really thought Here Be Dragons, the origin where you start with a massive dragon in your home system, would receive a big facelift. Despite this, Leviathans really haven't received big changes. Fruitful Partnership, which also hinges around space fauna, didn't receive that big of an upgrade. The biggest buff was the addition of the bioships, but it feels like the Custodians spent more time on the UI than making relevant origins more up to date. What did receive a much needed update was the Curators Enclave. Enclaves were introduced way earlier back with Stellaris' first expansion, and they tend to get sidelined in favor of newer content. Instead of neglecting the Curators like I normally do, save for a research boost, they were far more active in funding my endeavors this time around. Because I started off with the archive much earlier thanks to my civics, the Enclave acted almost like my patron, giving me unique buildings and boosting my collection. With this in mind, I wish we had the option to start near certain enclaves, because it has been a hit or miss experience for me. On other starts where I had the same civics, I didn't interact with the Curators as frequently because they were further away, and I missed out on some of these powerful early bonuses. I do like what the Custodians have done with the UI for this update, but some things feel like missed opportunities. I may sound like I'm yapping and complaining a lot, but I enjoyed a lot of what the DLC had to offer. The new mid-game crisis, for example, revolves around Voidworms, and I've had some fun with it so far. Basically, Voidworms will start reproducing at the start of the game, and once they reach a certain point, they will hit critical mass and trigger the crisis. At this point, Voidworms invade your systems and start bombarding planets to cause all sorts of chaos. I was really surprised by their fleet strength, because they can pack a massive punch if you are unprepared. There was another similar experience I had fighting some of the pirates in the Treasure Hunters origin, where they showed up and devoured my unprepared fleet. I'll try not to spoil too much, but there are some neat interactions with the Treasure origin and the new fauna. The Beastmaster's origin ironically didn't really have much to do with the Voidworm crisis outside of some buffs to my bioships. But something to consider with the Voidworm crisis is that more players are evenly affected. If you have the Great Khan, the players near the Marauder systems are going to be adversely punished, while empires farther away are less impacted. And I think that is the main takeaway with this DLC. The new additions like Specimens have been some of the best content we've received in a while. With that in mind, I wanted to see even more of that attention to detail with older content. In retrospect, Cosmic Storms felt like it could have been priced at $10, while GA became a full-fledged expansion. My review for this content pack is coming out later than usual because there's been so much to explore, and I really mean it when I say it has been fun with a few caveats. After some fine-tuning and balancing, I look forward to seeing where we land with Grand Archive. Until then, please let me know what your thoughts are on it so far, your expectations for the future, and what you think of my coverage in the comments section down below. Thank you guys so much for watching, I love you guys, peace.